What's going on, all you movie soundtrack lovers out there? Fat Samurai Guy is here with Lady Fat Blood. And we're talking soundtracks today.
Okay.
Scores.
Yeah.
Movie, film scores, and the power that they have.
Yeah, so a little bit of for context here, a little bit of an apology also. So we went and finally filmed our Avengers Endgame discussion / review / rant, yada yada yada, and it was clocking in at around an hour and 30 and
Maybe a little bit more.
about 30 minutes of that was completely my fault because I decided to hijack the review to talk about
How dare you.
Alan Silvestri's score and how I feel the music and the cinematic universe in particular was kind of not as great as it should be, and then just wanted to go into a tirade about how great Alan Silvestri's inclusion into the MCU was. So we decided to cut it for time because we figured it was already too long. So we're just gonna kind of jump into the video, and then there's really not going to be an outro or anything like that. This is just me gushing over how much I love movie scores, and how much I really appreciated Alan Silvestri's work in the MCU so far. So just have a drink. Try not to get too bored. It's only 30 minutes. I'm sorry, but I really love movie scores. So
What about dubstep?
So again, we've mentioned this before. We're of the oldest schooleth of filmiths.
I have the salt and pepperish.
Yes, where we grew up with, where movies were more rare back in the day. Not only were movies more rare, where you weren't getting hundreds of films being released every single year, but the big movies were big movies.
Yeah.
And that's where you get your Steven Spielbergs and your James Cameron back when he was actually a competent director. And you got your films back in the day where they were bigger, they were more magical. And along with that came movie scores where they were thematically just about as important as the films they were attached to. And somewhere along the way, and I would probably pinpoint it to maybe the mid to late 90s, maybe even more 2000s, where we lost that along the way. And I would say the last great score where you could actually listen to it, aside from Harry Potter, Harry Potter's too easy, I would say the Lord of the Rings, where you go into the Lord of the Rings because it was a trilogy where it was filmed back to back. It had the same composer throughout all three films, as opposed to Harry Potter, where it started off,
iconic themes were created.
Where Harry Potter started off with John Williams, and then went on to several different composers throughout the series, throughout the 8 films. Where Lord of the Rings, again, you had one composer in charge of all 3 films, and all 3 films had 3 distinct feelings to them. You had all these different themes working together and playing against each other, and each theme represented a certain either character or a certain land or a certain film. And that was of the old school writing. When you can't listen to any of the original trilogy of Star Wars films and not pinpoint what theme represents what character. John Williams just had
Or
this,
what scene, yeah.
John Williams just had this magic, and you can go back to and listen to the first 3 Indiana Jones scores. Everybody had a theme.
Or the original Danny Elfman 1989 Batman theme.
Yes, even in Batman Returns.
89 or 88?
89.
Okay.
And then Batman Returns was 92.
Right.
Yeah, go listen to the old Danny Elfman scores where him and Tim Burton just couldn't miss. You know, go listen to Beetlejuice. I defy you to listen to the main theme titles from Beetlejuice and not know what it's from. You listen to Edward Scissorhands, you know it's Edward Scissorhands. And we lost that.
Identity.
We lost that somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
Marvel is so guilty of this, and I've said this before. One of Marvel's greatest crimes in having superhero-themed films and this franchise that's been going on for 11 years now is that hardly anybody has ever had a consistent theme. That includes Iron Man. I believe it was 3 different composers for all 3 of his films. Thor had 3 different composers for all 3 of his films. Now, some of these composers have come back, like Brian Tyler did Thor: The Dark World, and I thought he created some good themes, which they reincorporated a little bit in Thor: Ragnarok, but again, a different composer. Brian Tyler came back and co-wrote Age of Ultron for some reason, which was very disjointed, but the best thing they ever did, despite not using one composer per franchise. Now, I'm not saying one person needed to wrangle in every single film. That wouldn't have worked, I don't think. But they really needed to solidify who these characters were. They needed one composer per franchise, and they almost had it with Captain America. Now, Captain America, the first Avenger, they brought in Alan Silvestri. Now, was it a little cheesy? Yeah, but so was the movie. It was a really nice little origin story that was a period piece, and I thought Alan Silvestri captured at least Cap's theme very perfectly. So what happened when 2012 comes around and you get the Avengers? Well, you don't have any theme for any character except for Captain America. And then what happens? What does Alan Silvestri do with Avengers? He gives them a theme. Now, despite not really getting the same punch with the score that we got in Age of Ultron, what did we still have that thematically you could listen to and you knew what was happening when you heard that particular theme? You had Alan Silvestri's theme because they chose...
The Avengers theme song.
They chose to keep it for the Avengers. So basically what you've got one man who's created the most iconic theme for the MCU. Now think of how much more we could have had if he had all these other themes to play with and work off of, and sadly we just don't get that. Now, one of the things that I was concerned about when Infinity War came out was the Russo brothers. Believe it or not, I'm ashamed to admit this, but because I always saw the Winter Soldier and Civil War as much darker and grittier and more risk-taking than the Avengers had been up until that point, I didn't know how, even though they had more than proven themselves, in my opinion, with Civil War. And I think that might have alleviated any trepidation I may have had for them taking over Avengers altogether. I think Civil War kind of helped me with them. But what I was really concerned with, because the Russo brothers had utilized composer Henry Jackman for The Winter Soldier and Civil War. Now, Henry Jackman is a composer that's done a lot of comic book films, believe it or not. He's done X-Men First Class, he's done First Kingsman. I don't know if he did the second Kingsman, but honestly it did not matter. That movie was shit. He did Kick-Ass, he did a lot of Kick-Ass. I think there was like a dual composer thing going on with that too. But I particularly loved Henry Jackman's flow with the Russo brothers because it just felt right. It did fit. And he gave me one of my favorite themes of the MCU. Again, you go back to a theme. What is the Winter Soldier's theme? If you ever hear that piece of music, you know who it is. You know who the character is that's representing it. And for the first second of the Winter Soldier, you actually hear a sliver of Alan Silvestri's Captain America theme. But it made sense to play it in that first couple of seconds of the film, and then they gave him a new theme in the Winter Soldier. But what did they do? They turned around and gave him a whole other theme in Civil War, but thematically it kind of made sense. I think I mentioned it in our old reviews, whatever. But I was so nervous when I heard that the Russo brothers were bringing Alan Silvestri back because tonally I didn't know how it was going to mix well. See, Danny Elfman's score for Justice League, which was a fucking train wreck. Now, I love Danny Elfman. I love Danny Elfman. I love Danny Elfman's work. Yeah. Don't get me wrong.
That score made me angry.
The score was nonsensical.
It's so generic.
Now, even if you dismiss the tonal inconsistencies that Justice League had because of the different directors completely just canceling out each other, Danny Elfman's score, which was not originally supposed to be a part of this film, just simply didn't fit. Now, I was really upset because I was under the impression that Junkie XL, who had co-written BVS, was going to take over. Which I thought would have been brilliant because he created a lot of good music that I enjoyed from BVS along with Hans Zimmer. And he was the perfect person to take up the mantle from BVS if anybody was going to do it.
Right.
So when I heard Alan Silvestri was coming in to write for the Russo brothers movie, I was like,
Is it gonna fit?
I don't know if this is gonna work.
It's gonna be
I know the
too
Avengers.
whimsical.
I know the Avengers theme is going to work
Right.
because it's worked in the past, whether he wrote it or not. But what I was not prepared for was, first of all, I'm sorry I ever doubted him for it not. I'm sorry I ever doubted that he couldn't pull it off spectacularly.
Mm-hmm.
But just try to imagine these two films, Infinity War and Endgame, without Thanos' theme. Try to imagine not only not using the Avengers score
That would have sucked.
that Sylvester created back in 2012 for the Avengers themselves. Try to imagine these two films without that piece. Try to imagine the scene where Thanos is throwing Gamora off of the cliffs of Vormir without that music that plays.
That was
in that
powerful
scene.
music.
Just try to imagine that quiet, ominous scene where Thanos is sitting on the porch after he's won. Try to imagine that scene without Alan Silvestri's score. And then you turn around, and again, he mirrors so much of what he does in Endgame. And there are two particular pieces of music where when Tony is about to die the first time on the ship, there's this really quiet theme that plays. And it's when Nebula checks on him and props him up on the pilot seat just before Captain Mistakes Remain shows up. There's this really quiet piece of music. Well, guess what happens when he actually dies? They bring it back just more dramatically.
Oh,
and
wow!
A little more loud. Just a little more thematically. It's very it's very appropriate. And then there's this other scene. There's this scene when Mistakes Were Made finds him and brings him back to Earth, and they're setting down. There's this piece of music on the score called Arrival. And what happens when the portals start to open and everybody starts to come back, he reincorporates that song much more, again, dramatically and emotionally.
Yeah.
And again, this is something that if you don't care, you don't hear it.
Right.
But film scores were my first love when it came to music. I remember noticing film scores when I was like 6 years old and just was like in awe of what they could do for a scene and how they could emotionally manipulate you in the best possible way.
They bring the emotion.
Exactly. And
we have a lot of generic movie scores now.
And Marvel
They all sound the same.
Marvel is just as guilty of that. I mean, as much as I enjoyed certain themes from Thor: The Dark World, it would have been nice to have had a solid theme throughout, even though, again, there is a little bit here and there from Thor: The Dark World that they utilized in Thor Ragnarok. There's a really small hint of a theme that they tried to give Thor in the first Thor film, and they use it a little bit at the end of Thor Ragnarok. Now, Thor Ragnarok was a score that fit its tone, so I didn't mind so much that there wasn't really a solid Thor theme throughout all three movies. But again, think of how much more impactful and recognizable and just plain nice it would have been if every single character had at least some hint of a consistent theme.
Right.
And again, Marvel is probably one of the most guilty of all of this, because for all of BVS and Man of Steel and Justice League's shortcomings, Justice League is the most egregious of them all, I think, in terms of movie scores. Superman had a theme. You might not necessarily, it's not nearly as recognizable as John Williams' theme from the original Superman, but Superman still had a theme. And guess what? In Man of Steel, he had a theme. Well, guess what? They used it again in Batman vs. Superman. Batman had a brand new theme in BVS, and it was played throughout, and it was recognizable, and it was there when it needed to be. And as much as people hate it, Wonder Woman had a theme.
Yeah.
And they carried it over into her own film, even though it was a different composer. But look at what they did.
Yeah.
They used something that was created by another artist that was recognizable and represented her very well. And they used it in another film. And it's like, Marvel. I get it. Most people don't care about movie scores, but it's almost a subliminal thing.
Yeah.
And you might not notice it when it's not there, but some people might pick up on it. It might
Yeah.
be a little more emotional if it is there, and I do lament that soundtracks have kind of gone by the wayside these days. But fortunately,
Doctor Strange's score was really good though.
and I think that was Michael
That was
Giacchino,
good. Yeah, that was a good score.
which is and he's
But
a
yeah,
composer.
good themes and iconic,
and-
memorable themes
Yes, and
are a rarity now.
they're very rare, and I'm so happy that I was proven so astonishingly wrong when it came to
he
my
did a great job.
misgivings about Infinity War.
Yeah.
Like, share, subscribe. Like, share, subscribe.